Tonight, we're diving into the real daily life of ancient Greece, not the marble statues and noble philosophers you've seen in textbooks, but the harsh, gritty reality most people faced. From backbreaking labor to brutal hygiene and strict social rules, surviving even a single day wasn't as glorious as it sounds. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And let us know in the comments where and when you're watching from. Now, let's step back in time and hopefully learn something new before you drift off to sleep. As the sun rises slowly over Athens, painting the horizon in shades of gold and amber, you might romanticize the glory of ancient Greece. You envision marble temples, philosophers debating eloquently in bustling squares, heroic tales whispered around fires, and magnificent statues adorning every street corner. But as your eyes flutter open, reality swiftly replaces fantasy. You're not in a villa draped in silk sheets or even a modest stone home. Instead, you awaken inside a cramped, dimly lit room. Mud brick walls, a rough clay floor covered with dusty straw, and the pungent scent of sweat and smoke from the smoldering embers of last night's hearth. Welcome to Athens in 430 BC, during its golden age under Pericles, a city hailed as the beacon of culture, democracy, and enlightenment. However, life here is brutally unforgiving. From the moment your bare feet touch the cold earthen floor, every aspect of daily existence challenges your modern assumptions of comfort and convenience. Your morning begins with a jarring truth. There is no running water. Instead, you must collect it yourself from the public fountains scattered across the city, lugging heavy clay jars through narrow, twisting streets already crowded at sunrise. Men and women alike queue impatiently, their chatter mixing with the cries of vendors and the braying of donkeys carrying fresh produce into the agora, Athens' central marketplace. The day's toil has already begun, and you're barely awake. Breakfast, if you could even call it that, is meager, coarse barley bread, hardened by days of exposure to air, dipped into diluted wine or olive oil. Fruits and vegetables exist, but are luxuries reserved for wealthier households. Meat is even rarer, appearing only during festivals or significant communal sacrifices. Nutritional variety is sparse. Your diet consists predominantly of bread, olives, figs, and legumes. You soon realize how quickly hunger can become a persistent companion. Personal hygiene, something taken entirely for granted in your modern life, is a daily battle. Baths are uncommon and often involve communal spaces, frequented more for socializing than actual cleanliness. Soap does not exist yet. Instead, you scrape away dirt and sweat with a curved bronze tool called a strigil after rubbing yourself with olive oil. The sensation is less refreshing than you hoped. It feels greasy, gritty, and hardly purifying. Stepping outside into the rapidly warming street, you're immediately assaulted by the pungent odors and clamor of city life. Streets in ancient Athens are narrow, winding alleys littered with garbage, human and animal waste, and the constant press of people navigating through chaotic markets. Privacy is non-existent. Your daily life unfolds under constant scrutiny from neighbors, acquaintances, and strangers alike. You are expected to contribute to society regardless of your condition. If you're male, the state demands military service, participation in political assemblies, and rigorous physical labor, all mandatory responsibilities rather than choices. If you're female, your world shrinks even further, confined largely to the domestic sphere. Your role revolves around household management, childbirth, and upbringing. Freedoms and rights are minimal, and your voice seldom heard beyond the confines of your own home. By midday, the oppressive Mediterranean sun beats down mercilessly. Shade is a scarce luxury, and heat stroke or dehydration are ever-present risks. Drinking water must be rationed carefully, and public wells become sources of anxiety as they occasionally run dry. Medical help is primitive by modern standards. Any illness or injury can swiftly become life-threatening. As you reflect upon these realities, you begin to grasp how harshly your romanticized vision of ancient Greece clashes with the brutal practicalities of daily survival. This isn't a life for leisurely contemplation. It's a relentless test of endurance, adaptability, and resilience. As you step cautiously into the agora, Athens' bustling heart, the romanticized grandeur of ancient Greece swiftly fades, replaced by chaos and overwhelming sensory assault. Every corner of the marketplace throbs with human activity, merchants hawking wares, philosophers arguing passionately, priests performing public rituals, and laborers transporting heavy crates. This crowded public square is not just the center of commerce, but also of politics, justice, and daily gossip. A place where reputations are made or ruined with alarming ease. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, a patchwork of stones worn smooth from centuries of foot traffic, interspersed with muddy puddles and garbage heaps. The aroma, a dizzying blend of fresh herbs, spoiled produce, livestock droppings, and unwashed humanity, makes breathing difficult. But you push forward, knowing that today's survival depends entirely on navigating this chaotic maze effectively. Stalls line every pathway, crammed closely together and loaded with commodities from all corners of the known world: spices from Persia, fine linen from Egypt, pottery from Corinth, and pungent cheeses from Thessaly. Yet purchasing anything is challenging. Money is scarce, wages are low, and bartering, rather than fixed pricing, dominates. Your negotiating skills are your greatest asset, a skill you've likely never perfected enough for this ruthless environment. Observing nearby, you watch as two men argue fiercely over the price of olive oil, their raised voices attracting a crowd. Conflict resolution is public, swift, and often humiliating. If disputes escalate beyond harsh words, they move to informal courts, presided over by ordinary citizens chosen by lot. Legal decisions are quick and unyielding, determined less by written law and more by persuasion, popularity, and emotional appeals. Justice, you realize, is both arbitrary and immediate. Passing through the throng, you encounter a stark reminder of social inequality. Slaves, captured in wars or born into servitude, fill nearly every household and business. They toil endlessly, their freedom non-existent, their lives valued only as much as their capacity to labor. While your modern sensibilities recoil at this inhumanity, Athenians view it as natural, a critical underpinning of their economy. You quietly ponder how fragile your own freedom would be in such a ruthless society. Women in public spaces are few, primarily slaves or lower-class citizens selling produce. Elite Athenian women rarely venture into the agora without a male guardian, their honor closely guarded. Gender roles are rigidly enforced. Deviation carries severe stigma and punishment. Your realization deepens. Survival here demands strict adherence to social norms, even at the expense of personal liberty. Continuing onward, you hear philosophers debating passionately. Their eloquent arguments ring sharply against the bustling background noise. While intriguing, their ideas about justice, virtue, and society seem detached from the harsh realities of daily life. Philosophy here is an intellectual luxury, pursued largely by the wealthy or those fortunate enough to escape the grind of daily survival. For ordinary citizens, survival leaves little room for contemplation. A sudden uproar interrupts your thoughts. A thief is dragged through the crowd, accused of stealing fruit. Mob justice swiftly follows, with rough hands and jeering insults. Witnessing this brutal scene, you realize how quickly one misstep can lead to disaster. There is no organized police force. Order relies entirely upon communal discipline and rapid, often harsh, punishment. This awareness settles uneasily in your chest. A single misunderstanding could turn you from a bystander into an outcast or worse. As midday approaches, hunger gnaws at your stomach, yet you hesitate to spend your few coins. Food prices fluctuate unpredictably. Starvation isn't abstract. It looms daily, a constant companion. Here in the agora, survival depends less on strength and more on cunning, resilience, and adaptability. One wrong move, one careless word, and your fragile foothold in Athenian society could crumble instantly. Standing in the hot midday sun, amid the tumult and chaos, you begin to see clearly. Ancient Greece may be celebrated as the cradle of Western civilization, but it's also a harsh world, unforgiving and relentless, demanding far more than most modern minds could endure. As noon passes, the merciless Mediterranean sun reaches its peak, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows across Athens. Sweat drips down your face, soaking into your coarse linen tunic, which clings uncomfortably to your skin. Life here demands constant labor, idleness is scorned, and survival hinges upon hard work, often in brutal conditions. Whether you are a farmer, a craftsman, a merchant, or a laborer, each role requires unwavering stamina and resilience. For most Athenians, the economy revolves around agriculture, primarily olives, grapes, and grains. If you find yourself among these farmers, your day begins well before sunrise. Fields stretch far outside the city, reachable only by exhausting treks on foot or by donkey through rugged terrain. Planting, harvesting, plowing. Every task involves manual labor with primitive tools. An iron-tipped plow pulled by oxen might seem efficient until you attempt to control these stubborn animals under blistering sun, their heavy hooves kicking dust into your face, choking your breath. Harvesting is equally grueling. Grapes and olives require precise timing. Too early or too late means economic ruin. Olive harvesting demands climbing precarious wooden ladders to pick fruits individually. Dropping them into baskets you must carefully balance. A single slip could mean injury, infection, or worse, permanent disability, as medical treatments offer little relief. If farming isn't your fate, perhaps you labor as an artisan, crafting pottery, forging bronze tools, or working stone. Skilled trades may sound dignified, yet the reality is exhausting, dangerous, and monotonous. Potters, for instance, spend hours hunched over spinning wheels, their fingers cracked and raw from shaping wet clay. They operate kilns heated by intense fires, tending them without protective clothing. Burns are common, and lung illnesses from smoke inhalation plague craftsmen regularly. Metalworking and smithing bring other risks. Fire and molten metal offer little margin for error. Bronze workers, who craft armor, weapons, and everyday tools, handle red-hot metals with rudimentary tongs, sparks constantly threatening burns or blindness. Workplace injuries often mean the loss of livelihood, plunging families into destitution. Without social safety nets, a simple accident could spell lifelong poverty or slavery. Perhaps you belong among the laborers who build Athens' impressive monuments, including temples and theaters that modern visitors admire. Construction is relentless, backbreaking, and hazardous. Workers lift massive stone blocks by hand, using wooden cranes powered by ropes and pulleys. The risk of crushing injuries is ever present. Limestone dust fills the air, choking your lungs and burning your eyes. Despite the grandeur of structures like the Parthenon, these majestic landmarks conceal stories of hardship and sacrifice, built upon the strained backs and broken bodies of ordinary Athenians. Yet you push through these daily hardships, motivated by necessity rather than ambition. The city does not reward mere survival, it expects endurance. Athenians idealize strength and stamina. Physical excellence is central to their culture, epitomized in their obsession with athletic competition. Every 4 years, the Olympic Games glorify athletes who demonstrate superior physical prowess. But while elite athletes gain fame and fortune, ordinary citizens face relentless pressure to maintain their fitness merely to withstand daily life. As the afternoon drags on, dehydration and exhaustion set in. Public wells offer scant relief, often overcrowded, their waters rationed and insufficient. Disease spreads rapidly in these conditions. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever lurk within contaminated water, ready to strike without warning. Medical care is limited, provided by physicians whose techniques include bloodletting, purging, and herbal remedies, often ineffective or even harmful. Reflecting on your day, you realize ancient Greece demands far more than physical strength. It requires mental fortitude. The constant threat of injury, illness, or economic ruin weighs heavily upon you. Even a single day of labor feels overwhelming. Ancient Greeks may have built a civilization admired throughout history, yet their daily existence was a harsh, relentless ordeal, a reality that would quickly crush modern romantic notions of life in the ancient world. As the relentless Greek sun dips slightly lower in the sky, fatigue grips your body. With each hour, the harsh realities of ancient Greek life become clearer, none more daunting than the fragility of your health. One minor illness, injury, or infection could rapidly become a life-threatening crisis, a risk you carry every moment of your existence. In ancient Greece, Healthcare is a precarious blend of folklore, religious superstition, and early scientific practices. There is no concept of germs or sanitation, leaving you exposed to countless invisible dangers lurking in your food, water, and environment. Streets filled with animal waste, rotting garbage, and untreated sewage breed disease. Parasites and insects thrive in the heat, biting and infecting residents indiscriminately. If illness strikes, you must rely on healers who vary greatly in skill and knowledge. Physicians trained in the tradition of Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, approach treatment with logic and observation rather than pure superstition. Yet even their remedies can be primitive and misguided. Bleeding, a common procedure intended to balance bodily humors, might weaken rather than strengthen you. Herbal remedies can sometimes relieve symptoms, but rarely cure underlying conditions. Your survival often depends more on luck and your body's resilience than any medical intervention. Imagine you wake with fever and chills, symptoms frighteningly common in the sweltering summers. Your condition rapidly worsens. Headaches, stomach cramps, vomiting. Malaria, carried by mosquitoes thriving near stagnant waters and marshlands around Athens, is rampant. Without effective treatments, recovery depends entirely upon your immune system. The illness can leave survivors weakened and vulnerable, prone to recurrence each year. Perhaps instead, a simple cut from daily labor becomes infected. Hygiene practices are rudimentary at best. Wounds are washed with wine or vinegar, covered with herbal poultices, or simply left exposed to air out, inviting further contamination. Infection can rapidly escalate, causing severe swelling, high fevers, and intense pain. Without antibiotics or antiseptics, even minor wounds can progress dangerously, leading to gangrene, amputation, or death. Injury from accidents, an ever-present threat, poses another significant risk. Broken bones are crudely set with splints of wood and bound tightly with cloth. Severe fractures, however, often remain improperly aligned, leaving permanent deformities and chronic pain. Dislocations are corrected violently, pulled into place without anesthesia, as excruciating screams echo through primitive healing chambers. You shudder at the thought of experiencing such agony, knowing no relief or escape exists. Dental care is virtually non-existent. Toothaches, unbearably common due to gritty diets of coarse bread, minimal oral hygiene, and frequent tooth decay, are managed by extraction, often performed without anesthetics. A local healer grips your tooth with crude metal pincers, wrenching it free with a violent jerk, leaving you dizzy and trembling, your mouth filled with blood. Recovery involves enduring intense pain and persistent infection risk. The plight of childbirth, common and unavoidable for many women, is terrifyingly perilous. Maternal mortality rates are shockingly high, with complications frequently ending in tragedy. Midwives offer herbal remedies and comforting words, but little else. Cesarean sections are virtually unknown, performed only as a last resort and almost invariably fatal to the mother. Childbirth thus becomes a dangerous ordeal, a reality accepted as part of life, with survival often attributed to divine favor rather than skillful medical intervention. Even mental health is scarcely understood. Depression, anxiety, or trauma are viewed through the lens of supernatural afflictions, curses from the gods, evil spirits, or punishment for moral failures. Treatment involves rituals, prayers, or consultations with priests and oracles, offering little practical relief. The stigma surrounding mental distress forces sufferers to endure silently, compounding their isolation and despair. As the afternoon fades, you pause and reflect deeply upon this stark reality. Your modern assumptions about healthcare, sanitation, and medicine do not apply here. Ancient Greece might be remembered as the cradle of philosophy and democracy, yet everyday survival hangs precariously by a thread. The relentless physical hardships, combined with a constant battle against disease and injury, highlight how fragile life truly is in this celebrated yet brutal civilization. As the sun drifts toward the horizon, casting long, somber shadows across Athens, you begin to sense another powerful force shaping daily life in ancient Greece: religion and superstition. Gods and goddesses, mythical creatures, and ancient rituals permeate every aspect of existence, influencing your decisions, your fate, and even your survival. The Greeks view their deities as capricious beings, powerful yet prone to jealousy, anger, and favoritism. Zeus, Poseidon, Athena, Apollo, each possesses unique domains of influence, from weather and sea voyages to wisdom and healing. Daily life is a constant negotiation with these divine entities, performed through prayers, offerings, and meticulous observance of traditions. If misfortune strikes, a sudden storm destroying crops, illness overtaking a family member, or an injury occurring without warning, Greeks interpret these events as divine retribution or displeasure. You're forced to seek favor or forgiveness through costly rituals or animal sacrifices. Sheep, goats, and occasionally bulls are slaughtered on stone altars, their blood poured out as offerings intended to placate angry gods. The smoke from burning fat and bones rises toward Olympus, a desperate plea for mercy. Oracles hold immense power, their prophecies guiding crucial decisions in politics, war, and personal affairs. The Oracle of Delphi, revered throughout Greece, receives pilgrims who journey great distances seeking answers. Her ambiguous proclamations influence decisions about war and peace, marriage and alliances. Consulting the oracle is an expensive endeavor, often requiring gifts and sacrifices beyond your means. Yet ignoring her wisdom could invite disaster, making it a gamble with your very survival. Superstition also guides daily behavior, embedding itself deeply into routine activities. Omens, such as the flight patterns of birds, sudden thunderstorms, or the appearance of snakes, are seen as messages from the gods, shaping decisions large and small. Even mundane tasks carry hidden spiritual risks. Stepping across certain thresholds without ritual preparation might offend household deities. Eating improperly prepared food could invoke divine wrath. The fear of supernatural punishment is ever present. Festivals dedicated to appeasing specific deities dominate the calendar, each accompanied by elaborate rituals and community gatherings. During the Thesmophoria, women gather privately, performing secret rites intended to secure fertility and abundant harvests. Failure to participate risks social condemnation and divine anger. Conversely, enthusiastic observance is believed to guarantee protection and favor. Yet the most feared supernatural entities might not be gods themselves, but spirits and creatures inhabiting the Greek imagination. You're warned repeatedly of the restless souls of the dead wandering the streets at night, malevolent spirits waiting to prey upon those careless enough to venture out after dark. Tales of monsters, like the Minotaur, Hydra, or Sirens, fill your evenings, recounted as both entertainment and cautionary warnings. Even educated citizens rarely dismiss these stories outright, their belief in such creatures a testament to the pervasive power of myth. Death itself carries profound religious implications. Proper burial rituals are paramount. A neglected funeral risks eternal unrest for the deceased soul and lingering misfortune for the living. Bodies must be meticulously prepared, washed, anointed, and mourned openly by grieving relatives. Cremation or burial rites performed incorrectly could haunt surviving family members for generations, trapping them in cycles of misery and ill fortune. Reflecting upon these intense spiritual demands, you begin to realize how deeply embedded superstition and religious practice are in everyday Greek life. Survival is not merely physical. It demands careful navigation through invisible spiritual threats and obligations. Your mental endurance is tested constantly, requiring vigilance, piety, and submission to forces you cannot control or even fully understand. As evening approaches, you wonder how long you could truly endure this environment, living perpetually in the shadow of powerful, unpredictable gods. Modern concepts of free will, reason, and control feel distant and unattainable here, overwhelmed by ancient fears, rituals, and the heavy weight of superstition. Ancient Greece, for all its intellectual and cultural brilliance, binds you tightly within a web of religious obligations, an invisible yet unbreakable force governing your every move. As dusk descends on Athens, the cooling air provides little comfort, for the city remains restless, poised on a knife edge between peace and war. You realize with uneasy clarity that warfare is not merely an occasional event. It is a defining element of Greek life, shaping identities, destinies, and daily existence. The constant specter of conflict looms over every citizen, inescapable and harshly unforgiving. Ancient Greece is not a unified nation but a patchwork of fiercely independent city-states. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, Corinth, each vying aggressively for dominance. Alliances form and dissolve swiftly, plunging the region into nearly continuous warfare. At this very moment, in 430 BC, Athens is embroiled in the brutal Peloponnesian War against Sparta, a relentless struggle for supremacy that drains resources and claims lives daily. You begin to understand the heavy toll this takes on ordinary Athenians. Military service is compulsory for male citizens, who are required to train rigorously in tactics and combat from adolescence. By age 18, you would find yourself armed with spear, shield, and sword, preparing for battles you neither chose nor fully comprehend. Refusal is unthinkable, equating to cowardice, a permanent mark of shame. Greek warfare is brutally physical, fought primarily in close-packed formations called phalanxes. You picture yourself pressed shoulder to shoulder among fellow hoplites, shields overlapping to create a wall of bronze and wood. Battles are chaotic, violent affairs, often decided by strength, discipline, and sheer nerve. The weight of armor, helmet, and heavy shield drains your energy rapidly. Battles frequently devolve into exhausting contests of endurance and mental fortitude. Injuries sustained in battle often mean death. Medical care on the battlefield is crude, with wounds hastily bandaged and left untreated. Fallen warriors are usually left behind until the fight ends, bleeding out alone or trampled by the chaos of combat. Even survivors often carry lifelong disabilities, reminders of war's harsh reality. If Athens falls under siege, as it currently is, your daily struggles multiply exponentially. Spartan armies encircle the city, cutting off trade routes and food supplies. Prices skyrocket, starvation sets in, and morale plummets. Walls that previously provided security become prison-like barriers, trapping you within overcrowded, disease-ridden confines. Life becomes a grim test of endurance, survival hinging on the dwindling reserves stored in communal granaries. Women and children suffer tremendously under these conditions. Families lose fathers, brothers, and sons, leaving women to manage households alone. Widows face poverty, forced to rely on charity or face destitution. Children grow up witnessing violence and deprivation, shaping their lives with trauma and uncertainty. The psychological scars of warfare permeate every aspect of society, eroding optimism and faith in the future. War also amplifies the risk of enslavement. Defeated cities often see their populations enslaved, stripped of their freedom, dignity, and identities. Captivity is a grim fate, often worse than death itself, reducing human beings to mere property, valued solely for labor or entertainment. The threat of enslavement is a haunting fear, driving fierce resistance in battle, yet creating a pervasive, underlying anxiety in everyday life. Even when battles are distant, their economic consequences shape daily existence. Heavy taxation to support military campaigns strains ordinary citizens, siphoning scarce resources away from necessities like food and clothing. Trade disruptions caused by war lead to scarcity and inflation, making basic survival an increasingly daunting challenge. Poverty and desperation become routine companions, shadows following you relentlessly through each exhausting day. You reflect on your own vulnerability in this world defined by conflict. Survival in ancient Greece is not merely about strength or cunning. It demands constant resilience against the psychological and physical toll of warfare. Your romantic notions of heroic combat fade quickly, replaced by sobering recognition. War here is brutal, relentless, and merciless, an ever-present storm threatening to sweep you away without warning. Standing in the gathering darkness, you sense deeply how fragile your position is within this turbulent society. Ancient Greece may offer unparalleled cultural and philosophical legacies, yet daily survival demands navigating an unforgiving world where war casts a constant shadow over your life. Night falls slowly over Athens, cloaking the bustling city in darkness. yet providing no relief from the intense social pressures governing every moment of your life. In ancient Greece, status, birthright, and lineage dictate your entire existence. From the moment you're born until your death, social hierarchy determines your rights, freedoms, opportunities, and even your basic dignity. The concept of equality as you understand it from the modern world is utterly alien here, something unthinkable and absurd. At the pinnacle of society stands the elite aristocracy, wealthy citizens whose bloodlines trace back generations. Born into privilege, these individuals hold power in politics, land ownership, and economic influence. They dominate assemblies, councils, and courts, their voices echoing loudly above all others. If you are fortunate enough to be born among this class, your path through life is comparatively secure, yet it still demands strict adherence to traditional roles, duties, and obligations. But if you find yourself in the lower ranks, which includes most Athenians, life becomes increasingly harsh and unforgiving. Below the wealthy elite, citizens scrape by as artisans, merchants, laborers, or farmers. Economic survival hinges upon relentless effort, competition, and shrewdness. There is little room for error or misfortune. A single poor harvest, failed business venture, or crippling debt can lead swiftly to poverty, slavery, or homelessness. Non-citizens, known as medics, occupy an even more precarious position. Often immigrants or foreign residents drawn to Athens for trade or opportunity, medics enjoy minimal rights and protections. They pay taxes yet are denied political participation, citizenship, and the ability to own land. Their position within society remains perpetually unstable, vulnerable to exploitation, harassment, or expulsion at the whim of powerful citizens. Trust and community acceptance come slowly, if at all. Yet, far below even these disadvantaged groups lies the harshest reality of ancient Greek society, slavery. Athens, despite its celebrated democracy, is fundamentally reliant upon enslaved labor. Slaves are integral to every aspect of economic life, from household chores and farming to public works and mining. Enslaved individuals possess no autonomy, dignity, or security. Their daily existence is dictated entirely by the whims and desires of their masters. As a slave, you might toil in brutal conditions within the silver mines of Laurium, where life expectancy is brutally short due to hazardous environments, toxic fumes, and relentless physical abuse. Household slaves, though spared the worst physical hardships, endure constant emotional and psychological torment. Your personal desires and identity are irrelevant. Obedience and invisibility define your existence. Even within family life, hierarchy governs interactions rigidly. Patriarchy reigns supreme. Fathers and husbands exert absolute control over women and children. Women in ancient Athens, regardless of social standing, endure severe restrictions. They possess no political rights, limited educational opportunities, and virtually no legal autonomy. Marriage often occurs young, arranged primarily for economic or political advantage rather than personal choice or romantic love. Women who deviate from societal expectations face harsh judgment, ostracism, or even violence. You witness women restricted largely to domestic spaces, responsible for managing the household and raising children, yet excluded from public life almost entirely. Their world is confined within walls, their movements watched closely to safeguard family honor. Public visibility is reserved mostly for slaves, prostitutes, or lower-class workers, groups viewed with suspicion or contempt. Children, too, experience the pressures of hierarchy from a young age. Boys are educated and groomed for citizenship, expected to uphold family honor through public service, military duty, and successful marriages. Girls, meanwhile, are taught domestic duties, their futures narrowly defined by marriage and motherhood. Childhood ends abruptly. Adolescents swiftly assume adult responsibilities, often without emotional support or preparation. Reflecting deeply upon this rigid hierarchy, you begin to grasp how fundamentally restrictive ancient Greek society truly is. Daily survival demands constant vigilance, careful adherence to social norms, strict maintenance of reputation, and careful avoidance of scandal or disgrace. A single misstep, disobeying authority, challenging convention, or expressing individuality too boldly could spell personal ruin or even exile. As you contemplate these realities beneath the darkening sky, it becomes painfully clear the romanticized vision of ancient Greek democracy, freedom, and enlightenment masks an incredibly rigid and harsh social structure. Survival here demands more than mere physical endurance. It requires careful navigation through a society that limits freedom and dignity at every turn. Under the faint glow of oil lamps, Athens hums softly into the night, revealing another complicated truth, one often overshadowed by history's admiration. Democracy in ancient Greece is far different from the modern ideal you might imagine. Though celebrated for birthing this groundbreaking political system, Athenian democracy is deeply flawed, selective, and often ruthless. Surviving within it demands more than civic duty. It requires careful navigation through a turbulent maze of politics, power, and public opinion. If you are a male citizen born to Athenian parents, democracy offers you an extraordinary privilege, a voice in shaping the laws and decisions that govern your city. Each citizen has the right and expectation to participate in the assembly, a massive gathering held regularly on the rocky hill called the Nix. Here, thousands of men crowd together beneath the scorching sun or freezing winds, debating passionately about war, peace, taxation, and alliances. Yet democracy in Athens is a demanding responsibility rather than a comforting right. Participation isn't optional. Citizens are pressured intensely to engage actively. Those who neglect public affairs or avoid assemblies earn reputations as lazy, selfish, or unpatriotic, labels carrying social and economic penalties. Civic duty often feels overwhelming, as decisions made in the assembly can alter lives dramatically, plunging Athens into war, peace, prosperity, or ruin. Moreover, not all voices within this democratic system are equal. Wealth and eloquence dominate the assembly. Charismatic speakers sway crowds effortlessly, leveraging rhetoric and persuasion over factual accuracy or fairness. Demagogues exploit public fears and prejudices, manipulating voters for personal or political gain. Ordinary citizens, lacking rhetorical training, struggle to influence decisions, their voices drowned by louder, wealthier rivals. Justice in Athens also bears unsettling features. Trials are public spectacles, judged not by legal experts, but ordinary citizens selected randomly by lot. Courtrooms echo with persuasive speeches, emotional appeals, and manipulative tactics. If accused, your fate hinges upon convincing a large jury of fellow Athenians, often swayed more by emotion than evidence. Innocence provides little protection against skillful orators or political enemies seeking revenge. A wrongful accusation could swiftly lead to severe punishments, including exile, hefty fines, imprisonment, or even death. The practice of ostracism, exiling citizens through popular vote, further highlights democracy's precarious nature. Annually, citizens gather, scratching names onto pottery shards. If your name appears most frequently, you're exiled from Athens for 10 years, forced to abandon family, property, and livelihood. Ostracism often targets successful or controversial figures, reflecting jealousy, rivalry, or fear rather than justice. This powerful tool hangs ominously over public figures, warning them to maintain popularity or face devastating consequences. Democracy's harsh realities extend beyond politics into daily life. Citizenship, the cornerstone of democratic rights, is strictly limited. Women, slaves, immigrants, and foreign-born residents are excluded entirely, relegated permanently to the margins. The so-called democracy includes only a fraction of Athens' actual population, creating deep societal divisions and resentments. Women especially suffer under this democratic ideal. Despite being citizens by birth, their rights are minimal. Barred from political participation, public assemblies, and juries, their role remains strictly domestic. Female perspectives on governance, war, and civic issues are silenced, their lives dictated entirely by male decisions. This exclusion reinforces rigid gender hierarchies and undermines true equality, casting a shadow over democracy's idealized legacy. Slaves and foreigners also find themselves powerless, their lives controlled by the democratic whims of others. Foreign residents, metics, pay taxes, and perform essential economic functions, yet remain politically invisible, vulnerable to discrimination or arbitrary expulsion. Slaves, meanwhile, provide labor underpinning Athens' wealth and leisure, their humanity ignored, their freedoms non-existent. Reflecting upon these harsh truths beneath the dim lamplight, you begin to question the very foundations of Athenian democracy. Its promise of equality and shared governance feels hollow, accessible only to privileged few. Democracy demands constant vigilance, ruthless competitiveness, and careful conformity, traits required simply to survive within its ruthless dynamics. As night envelopes Athens fully, your romantic illusions fade entirely. Ancient democracy, despite its historical legacy, proves deeply challenging, often cruel, and profoundly exclusive. Daily survival within this system means navigating constant political tensions, social rivalries, and legal vulnerabilities, realities far harsher and more perilous than the idealized versions of history suggest. As darkness fully envelopes Athens, the city transforms. The vibrant streets and lively marketplaces grow quiet, shadows lengthening ominously beneath the faint flicker of oil lamps. Nightfall in ancient Greece is far more perilous than you imagined. With daylight gone, dangers lurking beneath Athens' civilized facade emerge, testing your nerves and survival instincts to their limits. Streets at night become uncertain territory, filled with hidden threats. Crime is rampant after dark, especially in poorer neighborhoods and narrow alleys where the moonlight barely penetrates. Robbers, thieves, and violent criminals prey on vulnerable citizens, knowing that law enforcement as you understand it does not exist. City guards patrol sporadically, their authority minimal, their numbers insufficient to prevent crime. You're largely responsible for your own safety, forced to move cautiously, constantly alert to potential ambushes or assaults. Even your home offers limited security. Greek houses, especially among common people, are simple structures, mud brick walls, wooden doors without locks, and open windows covered only by cloth or shutters. Intruders can enter easily, stealing valuables or threatening your family. Personal protection relies heavily upon neighbors' vigilance or your physical ability to defend yourself. The thin veil separating safety from danger feels terrifyingly fragile. Beyond crime, nighttime harbors supernatural fears as well. Greeks deeply believe in restless spirits, ghosts of the unburied dead haunting the living, vengeful entities eager to punish neglectful relatives or careless wanderers. Tales whispered from childhood warn of sinister creatures like Empusa, shape-shifting demons who prey on solitary travelers after dark, or the malevolent spirits known as Charis, invisible beings believed to cause sudden, unexplained deaths. Your anxiety grows as darkness intensifies. Without modern lighting, even familiar streets become disorienting and menacing. Travel at night demands torches or lamps, luxuries not easily afforded by ordinary citizens. A sudden gust extinguishing your flame could plunge you into total darkness, vulnerable to imagined horrors or real dangers lurking nearby. The nocturnal hours also hide another harsh reality: the vulnerability of women and slaves to violence and exploitation. Female citizens rarely venture out alone at night, their safety entirely dependent upon male escorts. Unaccompanied women, especially slaves or lower-class individuals, face constant threats of assault or abduction. If you are female, your world shrinks dramatically after dark, confined indoors behind locked doors, anxiously awaiting the relative safety of dawn. Social gatherings, feasts, and symposiums, exclusive nighttime drinking parties attended by elite men, reveal hidden dangers of another sort. Excessive drinking fuels disputes, rivalries, and violence. Drunkenness is common, as wine diluted less than usual flows freely, loosening inhibitions and sparking confrontations. Arguments at these gatherings sometimes escalate rapidly into violent brawls, leaving injuries or grudges that linger for years. The luxury and indulgence of these gatherings mask hidden threats, requiring constant vigilance even within seemingly safe social circles. Sleep itself brings discomfort and vulnerability. Beds are simple, uncomfortable affairs, wooden frames covered with thin straw-filled mattresses, harboring lice, fleas, and bedbugs. Sleep comes fitfully, disturbed by itching, discomfort, and the anxiety of nighttime threats. Dreams carry significant spiritual meaning, often viewed as omens or divine warnings, further disturbing your rest. Reflecting upon this tense, uneasy existence beneath the darkened Athenian sky, you begin to recognize how utterly exhausting daily life is in ancient Greece. The physical hardships, relentless social pressures, constant threats of violence, supernatural fears, and unending anxiety take an enormous toll. You realize how ill-prepared your modern sensibilities and comforts are for enduring such continuous, unrelenting challenges. As you lie awake, straining your ears for threats approaching in the darkness, you wonder how long you could truly survive this world. Ancient Greece, celebrated for its beauty, philosophy, and innovation, proves harshly inhospitable, demanding relentless courage, endurance, and resilience simply to see another dawn. As dawn approaches once again, bringing with it faint streaks of pink and gold across the sky, you sit in quiet reflection, contemplating the relentless challenges of your day in ancient Greece. Just one day, one brief passage through sunrise, midday heat, dusk, and darkness, has exposed countless harsh realities that shatter the romantic illusions you once held. You think back to the first moments of your awakening, the cramped room, stale bread, and overwhelming uncertainty. You remember vividly navigating the chaos of the agora, the exhausting labor under relentless sun, and the constant, looming threat of injury or disease. Your mind revisits the fragile nature of health in a world without modern medicine, the fearful dependence on unpredictable gods, and the inescapable shadow of warfare. You recall how social hierarchies and rigid democratic politics governed your every move, and how darkness brought with it hidden threats both real and imagined. Each aspect of your day has been a test, not just of physical strength or endurance, but of mental resilience and emotional fortitude. You realize clearly that surviving even a single day in ancient Greece demands far more than you ever imagined. Every task, every interaction, every choice is fraught with risk, uncertainty, and the constant pressure of social expectations and limitations. You begin to understand something essential. The celebrated legacy of ancient Greece, the philosophy, democracy, art, literature, and architecture admired through history, was created under conditions unimaginably harsh and unforgiving. It was forged by people who endured daily struggles that most modern individuals could scarcely tolerate. The Greeks who built temples, penned philosophical treatises, composed enduring dramas, and established democratic principles did so while simultaneously battling hunger, disease, conflict, inequality, and superstition. Yet their achievements were not born from ease or leisure, but from relentless determination, courage, and adaptability. Surviving daily life here required strength, not merely physical, but emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. Their lives were brief and fragile, yet driven by a fierce pursuit of meaning, beauty, and understanding despite constant hardship. You recognize your own limitations clearly. Your modern comforts, clean water, medicine, abundant food, safety, personal freedom, have never felt more precious. The absence of these luxuries during your day in ancient Greece has made their value vividly clear. Survival here demands sacrifices unimaginable to contemporary sensibilities, revealing how profoundly civilization has advanced, even as it draws heavily from these harsh foundations. In this quiet moment before sunrise, your thoughts turn toward gratitude for modern life's invisible comforts, sanitation, healthcare, education, safety, personal rights, and freedoms often taken for granted. You marvel at the resilience of ancient Greeks, acknowledging that your brief immersion in their world underscores not only your own limitations, but also humanity's remarkable capacity for adaptation, endurance, and progress. The first rays of morning sunlight touch the rooftops, chasing away the shadows and easing your lingering fears. You rise slowly, stretching sore muscles, knowing your journey through ancient Greece has ended. Yet this experience has profoundly changed you. Romantic illusions replaced by respect, awe, and humility. You now appreciate deeply how fragile human existence can be, how powerful the human spirit is, and how challenging yet magnificent our collective history truly is. Would you have survived another day in ancient Greece? Perhaps, but you understand deeply that survival alone is not enough. Ancient Greeks sought to thrive, to create meaning from their struggles, to build lasting legacies despite relentless adversity. Their achievements, born from suffering and courage, inspire awe and gratitude. As you leave ancient Greece behind, returning to your modern world, you carry a newfound respect, not just for their cultural legacy, but for the immense hardships they endured. Your day spent in their harsh reality leaves an indelible mark, a profound appreciation for human endurance, adaptability, and the astonishing ability to create beauty and meaning even amidst overwhelming challenges. You breathe deeply, embracing the comfort and security of your familiar life once more, forever changed by your journey through just one unforgettable day in ancient Greece. You've seen the grit and struggle of ordinary life in ancient Greece, the disease, the rigid hierarchy, the never-ending labor and fear. Yet from within that same brutal world, there emerged rare figures who didn't just survive it, they bent it to their will. And none did so more completely than the boy from Pella, the man history would remember as Alexander the Great. In the northern Greek kingdom of Macedon, in the year 356 BCE, a child was born in the royal palace at Pella who would one day stretch the known world's boundaries and etch his name into legend. His name was Alexander. He was the son of King Philip II, a formidable warrior and master tactician who had transformed the once disregarded Macedonian kingdom into a dominant military force. His mother, Olympias, was a Meletian princess from Epirus, a fiercely intelligent and ambitious woman who believed her son was destined for greatness, perhaps even divinity. From the moment Alexander opened his eyes, the palace whispered of prophecy. Legends claimed that on the night of his birth, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus burned, a sign, some said, that the goddess herself had turned her gaze toward the child in Pella. His mother told him often that he was descended from Achilles through her line, and from Heracles through his fathers. Whether myth or truth, Alexander believed her, and belief would become one of his sharpest weapons. Philip, though often absent waging campaigns or securing alliances, ensured his son received the best education money and influence could provide. He summoned philosophers, poets, and scientists to Pella, crafting an elite intellectual environment for his heir. But it was one man above all others who would shape Alexander's mind: Aristotle. At just 13, Alexander was placed under the tutelage of the greatest philosopher of the time. Aristotle didn't merely teach him logic or rhetoric. He filled the boy's imagination with the ideas of ethics, politics, natural sciences, and Homeric heroism. He taught him that leadership required more than force, it required vision. Alexander absorbed it all, particularly the lessons of the Iliad. He read and reread the tale of Achilles, idolizing the flawed hero and modeling himself after him. He would even sleep with a copy of the epic beneath his pillow years later, carrying it with him as he marched across continents. Yet Alexander was not all mind. His father made certain that his son knew the sword as well as the scroll. He trained daily in horsemanship, archery, and the brutal mechanics of phalanx warfare. He was slight in stature, with piercing eyes and a restless spirit. Though small, he was agile and fearless. At the age of 12, he famously tamed a wild horse no one else could control, Bucephalus. Observing that the animal was frightened by its own shadow, Alexander gently turned him toward the sun and calmed him. That act alone revealed a boy not only brave, but shrewd, two traits that would define his reign. But all was not peace within the palace. Philip's ambitions, both political and personal, often drew him away from his family, and sometimes against them. He remarried multiple times, stirring tensions with Olympias and casting doubt on Alexander's claim to succession. Father and son, though similar in brilliance and ambition, frequently clashed. The young prince could not abide being overshadowed, even by his powerful father. Then came a moment that would change everything. In 336 BCE, at a wedding feast meant to celebrate Philip's unification of Macedon and Epirus through marriage, the king was assassinated, stabbed by one of his own bodyguards as he entered the theater. The reasons remain unclear, perhaps vengeance, political conspiracy, or something more personal. But in that chaotic moment, Alexander moved swiftly. At just 20 years old, he seized the throne. He crushed internal revolts, silenced rivals, and calmed nervous allies, all within months. His mother, ever his fiercest supporter, eliminated other potential heirs. The throne was his. The generals pledged loyalty. Greece watched and waited. And then, without hesitation, Alexander turned his eyes toward the east, toward Persia, toward destiny. The morning after Philip's assassination, uncertainty gripped Macedon. In the palace at Pella, nobles whispered and soldiers watched for any sign of weakness in the new, untested king. Alexander was just 20, young, ambitious, but unproven. Would he survive the coming storm, or would the kingdom shatter into chaos? Alexander's first actions were swift and ruthless. He immediately called the army to an assembly and addressed the men as his comrades. He reminded them of the victories they had won with his father, promising to surpass all that had come before. Some doubted him. Some rival claimants, including cousins and distant relatives, believed the throne should be theirs. Alexander, with the quiet encouragement of his mother Olympias, moved against them without hesitation. Rivals were executed or exiled. In a world where any sign of mercy could mean death, Alexander learned early that power demanded decisiveness, and sometimes cruelty. Beyond the palace, Macedon was far from secure. The Greek city-states, recently forced into uneasy alliance with Macedon after years of war and conquest by Philip, saw an opportunity to break free. In Thebes, Athens, and elsewhere, anti-Macedonian factions stirred rebellion. Alexander faced the first true test of his leadership, not against foreign enemies, but his own countrymen. He marched south with a small but fiercely loyal army, arriving in Greece before the city-states could unite. His strategy was as psychological as it was military. At Thermopylae, the same pass where Leonidas and his Spartans had faced the Persians a century before, Alexander made a show of force. He called the Amphictyonic Council, an ancient Greek religious league, and demanded to be recognized as leader of all Greece. Most cities submitted, awed by his speed and boldness. Athens hesitated but, remembering Philip's iron hand, chose diplomacy over resistance. Thebes, however, gambled on open rebellion. It was a fateful mistake. Alexander gave the city a chance to surrender. When it refused, he unleashed his army. Thebes, once the greatest power in Greece, was crushed. Its walls were torn down, thousands killed or sold into slavery, and the city razed, except for temples and the house of the poet Pindar, spared in a symbolic gesture to Greek culture. The brutal destruction of Thebes sent shockwaves across the Greek world. Alexander's message was clear: defiance would mean utter ruin. With Greece pacified, Alexander returned to Macedon to prepare for the next stage of his ambition. The throne was secure, but challenges loomed. To the north, barbarian tribes threatened the borders. Alexander led swift campaigns against them, driving them back across the Danube. Every victory added to his reputation. A warrior king as daring as Achilles, as ruthless as any who'd ruled before. Yet even as he fought and conquered, Alexander was driven by a sense of destiny. Stories from his childhood echoed in his mind. His mother's claims of divine ancestry, Aristotle's lessons about the wide world beyond Greece. He began to dream of greater conquests. The Persian Empire, vast, fabulously wealthy, and ancient, beckoned from across the sea. It was the greatest power on earth, led by Darius III, a king surrounded by gold, palaces, and armies that dwarfed anything Greece could muster. Conquering Persia would not just avenge past Greek humiliations, it would make Alexander master of the known world. In the spring of 334 BCE, after 2 years consolidating power, he called his generals to him. With a force of 35,000 Macedonians, Greeks, and mercenaries, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor. As his ship landed on the Asian shore, Alexander leapt onto the beach, hurled a spear into the sand, and declared the land won by the sword. He stood now on the edge of the world he had known, ready to begin a campaign that would change history forever. The crossing into Asia marked not only the start of a military campaign, but the beginning of a legend. Alexander's army, 35,000 strong but dwarfed by the Persian Empire's resources, stepped into unfamiliar territory. an audacious gamble that few believed could succeed. For Alexander, however, this was not just a war of conquest. It was a mission to avenge centuries-old wounds, to finish what previous Greek leaders had only dreamed of, and to secure everlasting glory. The Persians did not wait long to challenge the invaders. In May 334 BCE, Alexander's army reached the banks of the Granicus River in northwestern Asia Minor. There, a Persian force, commanded by local satraps and reinforced by Greek mercenaries, waited to halt his advance. The river itself, swollen by spring rains, formed a natural barrier, and Persian cavalry lined the far bank, prepared to crush the Macedonians as they tried to cross. Many of Alexander's seasoned generals urged caution. To attack across a fast-flowing river against entrenched cavalry seemed reckless, almost suicidal. But Alexander's genius lay in his willingness to seize the initiative, to act with speed and daring when his enemies expected hesitation. In the evening light, he donned his gleaming helmet with its distinctive white plumes, mounted Bucephalus, and gave the order to attack. The first Macedonian cavalry plunged into the river, arrows and javelins raining down upon them. The water churned around the struggling horses, and for a moment, it seemed the attack would falter. But then Alexander himself led the next wave, charging straight into the chaos at the head of his companions, the elite cavalry unit. His presence electrified his men. Macedonian infantry followed, forming ranks as they scrambled up the muddy opposite bank. A savage melee erupted on the Persian side. Alexander was in the thick of it, easily recognized by his shining armor. He fought like the heroes of Homer, slashing, shouting, rallying his men, and in the heat of battle, he narrowly escaped death when a Persian noble raised his sword to strike. At the last instant, Clitus the Black, one of his oldest friends, intervened, cutting down the attacker and saving Alexander's life. The Persians faltered. Their cavalry, unable to maneuver in the crowded chaos, broke ranks. The Macedonian phalanx pressed forward relentlessly, driving the defenders back. Soon, what had begun as a bold gamble turned into a rout. The Persians abandoned the field, leaving hundreds of dead behind, among them many Greek mercenaries who had fought on the wrong side. Alexander ordered that these men be shown no mercy, sending a stark message to any Greeks who might consider siding with Persia. The victory at Granicus was swift and decisive, sending shockwaves across Asia Minor. Alexander had shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. City after city, hearing of his triumph, opened their gates to the young conqueror rather than risk destruction. In some, he was greeted as a liberator. In others, he imposed harsh discipline. Yet Alexander was never content with easy victories or simple solutions. After the battle, he visited the wounded personally, rewarding bravery and ensuring his men were honored. He sent spoils back to Greece, 300 Persian shields, dedicated to Athena at the Parthenon in Athens, as proof of Macedonian supremacy. But the Persian Empire was vast, and Granicus was only the beginning. With the river behind him, Alexander pressed deeper into Asia, his eyes fixed on the next challenge. Ahead waited not just Persian armies, but ancient cities, impossible odds, and a world that had never seen a conqueror of his ambition. With the victory at Granicus echoing through the land, Alexander and his army pressed deeper into Asia Minor. The Persian satraps who had survived the rout scattered, spreading fear and uncertainty in their wake. For many of the Greek cities of the Ionian coast, places like Ephesus, Miletus, and Halicarnassus, Alexander's advance brought a moment of hope. These cities, descendants of Greek colonists but ruled for generations by Persian overlords, watched closely to see if this new conqueror would be a liberator or a tyrant. In Ephesus, the citizens welcomed him with olive branches and laurel wreaths, eager to cast off the Persian yoke. Alexander restored democracy, honored their gods, and paid tribute at the temple of Artemis. His approach was shrewd. He recognized the power of symbolism and made it clear that, though Macedonian by birth, he stood for the freedom of all Greeks. It was a calculated move, strengthening his legitimacy and weakening Persian influence. Other cities were less willing to submit. At Halicarnassus, Alexander faced his first major siege. The city's formidable walls and Persian garrison, led by the resourceful Memnon of Rhodes, presented a serious obstacle. Alexander's engineers constructed siege towers and battering rams, while his archers unleashed a storm of arrows. The fighting dragged on for months. The defenders launched daring night raids, even setting fire to Macedonian siege engines. Yet Alexander's resolve never wavered. At last, after intense street battles and the destruction of much of the city, Halicarnassus fell. Memnon escaped by sea, but the message was clear. Alexander could not be stopped by walls, distance, or fear. With the Aegean coast secured, Alexander marched inland through Lydia, Phrygia, and further east. Along the way, he continued to use both force and diplomacy. Cities that surrendered were treated with leniency. Those that resisted met harsh consequences. This mixture of generosity and brutality became a hallmark of his rule. He also established new cities, often called Alexandria, planting the seeds of Greek culture far from the homeland. These foundations would become centers of learning, commerce, and administration for centuries to come. One of the most enduring legends from this period came at the ancient city of Gordium. In the palace there, an ox cart was tied with an intricate knot, the famous Gordian knot. Local prophecy held that whoever could unravel it would rule all Asia. Alexander, faced with the stubborn knot, simply drew his sword and sliced through it. Whether an act of impatience or genius, the deed became yet another symbol. Alexander did not believe in waiting for fate. He seized it. As spring turned to summer, Alexander's army moved through the harsh, arid interior. The journey tested every man. Supplies ran low, and the relentless sun punished soldiers and animals alike. Disease and desertion became constant threats. Yet Alexander pressed on, sharing the same hardships as his men, marching alongside them rather than riding in comfort. This won him a rare kind of loyalty. His men began to believe not only in their general, but in the destiny he claimed for them. Meanwhile, the Persian king Darius III could no longer ignore the threat. He began assembling a vast army from the corners of his empire, one that would dwarf anything Alexander had faced so far. Rumors of the size of Darius's host, its war chariots, elephants, and endless ranks of archers and cavalry, filtered through the Macedonian ranks. Fear was real, and some urged Alexander to pause and consolidate his gains. But hesitation was not in Alexander's nature. He drove his army forward, deeper into the unknown, knowing that somewhere ahead, the fate of empires would be decided. Autumn of 333 BC brought Alexander and his men to the narrow coastal plain near Issus, where the mountains met the sea. Here, the fate of empires would be tested. Word spread that Darius III himself, King of Kings, had finally taken command of the Persian forces, bringing with him an army so vast that, as the stories went, it drank rivers dry as it marched. For the first time, Alexander would face the full might of the Persian Empire and its ruler. The two armies, separated by the cold waters of the Pinaris River, stared at each other across the plain. Darius's army numbered in the hundreds of thousands, outnumbering Alexander's force many times over. Persian banners fluttered above an ocean of troops, cavalry, archers, and the famous immortals. Darius sat atop a gilded chariot, surrounded by nobles. His presence meant to inspire awe and confidence. Yet the narrow ground favored the Macedonian phalanx, reducing the Persian advantage in numbers. On a cold, blustery morning, Alexander rode along the front ranks, his helmet glinting, urging his men not to fear the enemy's numbers. He reminded them of their victories, the discipline of their formations, and the stakes of the coming battle. As the Macedonian trumpets sounded, his men braced themselves for the onslaught. The Persians attacked, but the terrain forced their vast army to squeeze into the narrow plain, robbing them of maneuverability. Alexander placed himself on the right, opposite Darius. The Macedonian phalanx, shields locked and pikes bristling, advanced methodically, holding firm against waves of Persian assaults. Cavalry clashed on the flanks, sending up clouds of dust and screams. Alexander, leading his companions, spotted a gap in the Persian lines and charged directly toward Darius's chariot. The battle was fierce and chaotic, men locked in close combat, the air thick with the clash of metal and the cries of the wounded. At the crucial moment, as the Macedonian cavalry punched through, Darius lost his nerve. Faced with the prospect of capture or death, he fled the battlefield, abandoning his chariot, royal cloak, and even his mother, wife, and children. The Persian army, seeing their king in flight, broke and scattered. Victory was complete. The Macedonians cut down fleeing Persians as far as daylight lasted. The spoils were immense. Untold riches from the royal camp, priceless treasures, and the entire Persian royal family, now prisoners but treated with unexpected respect by Alexander. In a world where defeat often meant slaughter, Alexander's clemency was extraordinary. He assured Darius's family of their dignity and safety, winning admiration even from his enemies. Yet Issus was more than just a military triumph. It marked the moment when Alexander was truly recognized not merely as a conqueror, but as the equal of kings. The world had taken notice. The son of Philip, the boy from Pella, had defeated the Lord of Asia. News of the victory swept through Greece and Persia alike, sending shockwaves through the ancient world. But Alexander did not linger. He knew Darius would raise another army. The campaign pressed on, south toward the rich Phoenician cities and, ultimately, to the gates of Egypt. At Issus, Alexander had crossed a threshold, from bold challenger to ruler of empires. For him and his men, the journey was only just beginning. The world had never seen anyone quite like Alexander, and the world would never be the same. After Issus, Alexander turned his army south, toward the cities of the Levant. Many, like Sidon, surrendered quickly, but Tyre, the jewel of the Phoenician coast, refused him entry. Perched on a fortified island half a mile from the mainland, Tyre had withstood every conqueror for centuries. Its defiance was both a military and a symbolic challenge. If Alexander could not take Tyre, his legend would stall at its walls. The siege of Tyre would become one of the greatest feats of engineering and determination in the ancient world. Unable to assault the city directly, Alexander ordered his men to construct a causeway, a massive stone and timber bridge stretching across the sea, battered by storms and constant Tyrian attacks. The work took months. Tyrian divers sabotaged the construction, fires swept through the Macedonian camps, and all the while, Alexander's enemies mocked his folly. But the king would not yield. He gathered fleets from conquered Phoenician cities, transforming his army into a makeshift navy. With battering rams and siege towers floating on ships, Alexander unleashed a final assault. After 7 grueling months, the walls of Tyre fell. The city was stormed, its defenders slaughtered or enslaved, a brutal warning to all who would defy the Macedonian. The destruction of Tyre echoed across the ancient world, proof that Alexander's will could not be denied. From Tyre, Alexander marched south through Gaza, another bloody siege, before reaching the edge of Egypt. The Egyptians, weary of Persian rule and awed by his victories, welcomed Alexander as a liberator. At Memphis, priests crowned him pharaoh, proclaiming him the son of Ammonius, the living god. For Alexander, it was more than a formality. He embraced the divine honors, blending Macedonian, Greek, and Egyptian customs to forge a new identity. It was here, too, that he founded Alexandria, a city that would become a beacon of Greek culture, trade, and learning for centuries. Yet, for all the triumphs and ceremonies, Alexander's ambitions were never satisfied by mere conquest. From Egypt, he journeyed deep into the western desert to consult the oracle of Zeus Ammon at Siwa Oasis. Legends would swirl for centuries about what the oracle told him. Some said he learned he was the son of a god. Others claimed he received a secret prophecy about his destiny. Alexander never revealed the full truth, but he emerged from the desert more convinced than ever of his invincibility and the righteousness of his cause. The young king's sense of destiny became contagious, spreading through his officers and soldiers. Men who had marched for years and crossed continents began to believe they were living through an epic greater than Homer's tales. But such belief came with a price. The army grew weary, the casualties mounted, and the lands they conquered became ever more foreign. Still, Alexander pressed on, his eyes set firmly to the east. Word soon reached him that Darius was raising another army in the heart of Persia. The time had come for Alexander to pursue his old rival, into the very center of the Persian Empire, toward Babylon and the seat of the King of Kings. But first, with Egypt behind him, The young conqueror paused on the shores of the Mediterranean, looking eastward, contemplating the vastness of what still lay ahead. In a few short years, Alexander had reshaped the world from the mountains of Macedon to the sands of Egypt. Yet he knew, as all great figures do, that the greatest tests and the deepest reflections were still to come. With Egypt secured and his legend growing, Alexander set his sights on the very heart of the Persian Empire. He led his army northeast, crossing back into Asia, marching with determination toward the ancient city of Babylon and the open plains beyond. Darius III, desperate to redeem his earlier defeat, gathered the greatest force the East had ever seen. Cavalry, chariots with scythed wheels, elephants, and infantry drawn from every corner of his vast domain. The stage was set for the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, a confrontation that would determine the fate of empires. The Persian host stretched across the plain, perhaps 500,000 strong by some ancient accounts. Darius believed that, at last, he had the numbers and the ground to crush the Macedonian upstart. Alexander, outnumbered as always, relied on discipline, tactics, and the unwavering loyalty of his men. On the night before battle, Alexander let his troops rest, while Darius's army waited anxiously under arms. At dawn, Alexander addressed his soldiers, reminding them that the world watched, that this day would shape history. Riding at the head of his companion cavalry, he led his forces forward, refusing to be drawn into Darius's traps. The Persians unleashed their scythed chariots, hoping to break the Macedonian lines. But Alexander had prepared his troops. At the last moment, they opened their ranks, letting the chariots race harmlessly through before turning on them from behind. Then, seeing a gap open on the Persian left, Alexander charged with his cavalry straight for Darius. The Persian king, confronted with the imminent threat, panicked and fled, again, leaving his army leaderless. The Macedonian phalanx pressed the assault. The Persian lines crumbled. Babylon and Susa opened their gates to the victor, sending treasures and emissaries to greet the new master of Asia. Alexander entered Babylon not as a conqueror bent on destruction, but as a king seeking legitimacy. He preserved temples, honored local gods, and absorbed Persian customs. By embracing rather than erasing the conquered world, he hoped to weld Greeks and Persians into a single empire. But Darius was not yet finished. Fleeing eastward, he tried to rally support among the eastern satraps. Alexander pursued him relentlessly across the arid lands of Media and Parthia. It was not Macedonian arms, but Persian betrayal that brought an end to Darius. His own generals, losing faith in his leadership, assassinated him and left his body for Alexander to find. When the conqueror stood over his old enemy's corpse, he mourned him and gave him a king's burial, condemning the traitors who had committed the act. With Darius dead, Alexander became King of Asia, a title that was more a challenge than a reward. The Persian Empire had not been merely conquered, it now had to be ruled. From Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, Alexander sent home immense treasures, gold, jewels, and art, to Macedonia and Greece. He burned the royal palace, whether as a drunken gesture of vengeance or a calculated symbol of a new era, no one can say for certain. The fire's glow marked the end of centuries of Persian rule and the rise of a new world order. Yet the conquest of Persia did not bring Alexander peace. Instead, it awakened new ambitions and deeper questions. He adopted Persian dress, married Persian nobles, and demanded that his officers do the same. Some loyal followers grumbled, others marveled at his vision. Alexander dreamed now of a world united, not just by force, but by culture, blood, and belief. But empires, like men, are fragile things. As Alexander pushed farther east, into lands unknown to Greeks or Macedonians, both triumph and tragedy awaited. With Persia's vast riches and ancient cities now under his rule, Alexander's ambitions grew ever more boundless. To many of his generals, victory over Darius should have marked the campaign's end, a time to return home and savor triumph. But Alexander's vision reached beyond the map's edge, into lands his soldiers had only heard of in myths, the wild heart of Central Asia and, farther still, India. First, he set about consolidating power across the eastern satrapies, regions filled with fierce tribes, distant from the old Persian capitals and utterly foreign to Greek and Macedonian ways. In Bactria and Sogdiana, rugged lands of mountain fortresses and elusive warlords, resistance flared again and again. Alexander responded with relentless campaigns, laying siege to hilltop strongholds, chasing enemy leaders into the snow-capped peaks and arid plains. It was here that Alexander met Roxana, the daughter of a local noble. Their marriage, part alliance, part genuine affection, symbolized his broader policy, not just to conquer, but to weave together the peoples of his new empire. He encouraged his officers and men to take local wives and learn local customs. To many Macedonians, this was bewildering, even scandalous. But Alexander's vision was clear. He sought not just an empire of land, but of hearts and minds. Yet these years in Central Asia were hard and bitter. Alexander grew more isolated, his leadership harsher, sometimes even paranoid. The army endured punishing marches, supply shortages, and surprise attacks from guerrilla fighters. At Marikanda, modern Samarkand, a drunken quarrel turned deadly when Alexander, in a fit of rage, killed Clitus the Black, the very man who had saved his life at Granicus. Grief followed fury, but the damage could not be undone. The conqueror's temper and the burdens of absolute power began to cast shadows over his legend. Still, Alexander pressed on. He founded more cities, all called Alexandria, planting Greek culture deep into Asian soil. These outposts, mixing temples, marketplaces, and theaters, became beacons of the new, blended world he imagined. He adopted the Persian practice of proskynesis, the act of bowing or prostrating before the king, a demand that outraged many of his Macedonian veterans, who saw it as an affront to their freeborn dignity. In the spring of 327 BCE, Alexander set his sights on the fabled lands beyond the Hindu Kush. India, a place of dazzling wealth, elephants, and rulers who claimed descent from gods. The crossing itself was an epic feat. Armies, engineers, and camp followers forced their way through towering passes and hostile valleys. Rivers, swollen with monsoon rains, became barriers that only Alexander's stubborn determination could overcome. At the Battle of the Hydaspes, on the banks of the mighty river now called Jalem, Alexander faced King Porus, who commanded an army with towering war elephants and thousands of warriors. The battle was fierce and costly. Macedonian horses panicked at the sight and smell of the elephants. But through a combination of tactical brilliance, night maneuvers, and relentless pressure, Alexander prevailed. Impressed by Porus's courage, he allowed him to keep his kingdom as a vassal, a rare gesture of respect in an age defined by conquest. Yet, for all the glory, Alexander's men had reached their limits. Exhausted by years of marching, fighting, and hardship, they refused to march farther east at the Hyphasis River, now Bias. Alexander raged and wept, but even the greatest king cannot command men beyond endurance. With a heavy heart, he agreed to turn back, his dream of reaching the world's eastern edge reluctantly abandoned. The return journey was no less perilous. Instead of retracing their route, Alexander led his army south through the harsh Gedrosian desert, a miscalculation that cost thousands of lives to thirst and starvation. Only a fraction of his original force reached the safety of Persian lands. Even so, the survivors returned as legends, men who had followed their king to the ends of the earth. Now, with the boundaries of his empire carved into the farthest reaches of the known world, Alexander returned westward, a conqueror unmatched in ambition, but also marked by loss, exhaustion, and the deepening question of what it meant to rule such a vast and varied realm. Alexander's epic journey had carried him farther than any Greek or Macedonian had ever dreamed, but as he led his battered army westward out of India, new challenges emerged, ones not of conquest, but of leadership, legacy, and fate. The empire he had carved stretched thousands of miles, from the Nile to the Indus, binding together dozens of peoples, languages, and traditions. Yet for all its grandeur, it was fragile, held together by a single will. Returning through Persia, Alexander found many of his satraps and governors corrupt, abusive, or disloyal in his absence. He moved with characteristic decisiveness, executing or replacing officials, demanding loyalty, and restoring order. But the problems were more than administrative. Years of war and mingling of cultures had created tensions. Macedonian veterans grumbled over their king's Persian dress and customs. Persians felt their traditions were not respected enough. Greeks and Asians alike wondered what the future held when a single man held so much power. To bridge these divides, Alexander held the Grand Mass wedding at Susa in 324 BCE, marrying scores of his officers to Persian noble women, including his own second marriage to Statira, daughter of Darius. The spectacle was meant to symbolize the fusion of East and West, forging bonds of loyalty through family and blood. Yet for many, the event was a forced union, one that sowed quiet resentment rather than harmony. As Alexander reached Babylon, ancient, magnificent, and cosmopolitan, he envisioned it as the new heart of his empire, a city where Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Eastern cultures might mingle and flourish. He began ambitious building projects and planned new campaigns to Arabia and even beyond the edges of any map the Greeks possessed. But the king who had survived countless battles could not escape the invisible enemies within. In the spring of 323 BCE, after a lavish banquet and days of fever, Alexander fell gravely ill. Some suspected poison. Others believed the relentless hardships of his campaigns had finally caught up with him. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, his generals and friends gathered in Babylon's palace, desperate for a word of hope. He was just 32 years old. Legend holds that, when asked to whom he would leave his empire, Alexander whispered, "To the strongest." The room erupted in uncertainty. With no clear heir, his son by Roxana was yet unborn. Alexander's sudden death threw the vast realm into chaos. The grief that swept over his army and the lands he ruled was profound and genuine. Men who had marched across deserts and mountains, who had fought beside him from Macedonia to India, wept openly. His body, embalmed and encased in gold, was destined for a tomb fit for a god. But even in death, his presence shaped the world. Yet the empire he created could not outlive its creator. Almost immediately, his generals, known as the Diadochi, began vying for power, dividing the vast territory into warring kingdoms. His dream of a united world would fracture into rival dynasties: Ptolemies in Egypt, Seleucids in Asia, Antigonids in Macedon and Greece. The age of Alexander had ended, but the age of his successors had just begun. In the flickering light of Babylon's torches, as the news of his death spread like a shadow across continents, the world paused. For a moment, anything had seemed possible. Alexander had not merely conquered lands. He had changed how his era saw itself, forever altering the course of history. And yet, the greatest riddle remained. Was his journey one of glory or hubris, heroism or destruction? Even as his empire splintered, the legend of Alexander only grew. For centuries to come, his name would conjure images of ambition unbound, of possibilities and dangers that lay just beyond the known horizon. The death of Alexander the Great marked the end of an era, but not the end of his story. As news of his passing spread from Babylon to the furthest corners of his empire, shock and uncertainty rippled through cities, armies, and families. His body would be buried in splendor, but the world he left behind was far from at peace. In the years and centuries that followed, his life would become a mirror in which both the dreams and nightmares of empires were reflected. The empire fractured, just as many had predicted. Alexander's most trusted generals, the Diadochi, carved it up in a series of bloody wars, each seeking to claim a portion for themselves. The world map was redrawn with each battle and alliance. Ptolemy took Egypt, establishing a dynasty that would end with Cleopatra. Seleucus ruled Persia and the vast lands of Asia. Antigonus and his descendants tried to hold on to Greece and Macedon. None would ever rule as Alexander had, over both East and West, with one will, one vision. Yet the changes he wrought were irreversible. Everywhere Alexander went, he left more than ruins and memories. He left a new order. His cities, Alexandria in Egypt and dozens of others, became beacons of Hellenistic culture, fusing Greek art, science, philosophy, and language with the traditions of Persia, Egypt, India, and beyond. Greek became the lingua franca of commerce and learning, a glue that bound together people from Egypt to Afghanistan. New schools of philosophy flourished. Scientists, mathematicians, and writers from every background gathered in libraries and marketplaces, trading ideas in ways that would shape the ancient world for centuries. But the legend of Alexander was more than buildings and books. To the Greeks, he was a hero and a god. To the Persians, sometimes a liberator, sometimes a destroyer. For centuries, generals and kings would invoke his name, measuring themselves against his impossible standards, seeking to claim his mantle. Julius Caesar is said to have wept before a statue of Alexander, lamenting that he had achieved so little by the same age. Augustus, Napoleon, and countless others would model themselves on him, chasing an ever-elusive greatness. Yet Alexander's legacy was also a warning. His relentless drive, his refusal to rest, and his efforts to blend cultures brought both wonders and disasters. The empire he created was too vast for any one system or person to control. As the centuries passed, the lands he once ruled would become the crossroads of empires, faiths, and cultures, sometimes uniting in prosperity, often clashing in violence. In the end, Alexander left more questions than answers. What does it mean to conquer the world, yet die young and alone, your dreams unfinished? Was he a visionary or a tyrant, a builder or a destroyer? Perhaps, as the stories multiplied, he became all of these at once, a symbol of human ambition and its price. But even today, as you walk the ruined streets of ancient cities or read the faded names of kings, Alexander's shadow lingers. He reminds us of the heights a single life can reach and the costs that follow. His world was brutal, magnificent, and fleeting, a testament to the enduring power and peril of dreams without limits. In the quiet that follows the fall of empires, in the echo of distant battles and the libraries filled with new knowledge, Alexander's spirit endures. His story is not only about conquest, but about the fragile, beautiful, and dangerous act of reaching beyond what seems possible. And so, the boy from Pella, like a comet blazing across the night sky, left the world forever changed, and forever wondering what might lie just beyond the horizon.